This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon and welcome to AI Answers, weekly updates from the world's leading valuation authority. My name is Bill Garber. I'm Director of Government and External Relations for the Appraisal Institute. It's November 4th, 2020. And today we are going to discuss alternative commercial valuations. Today we're going to discuss commercial alternative valuation products and services in the commercial real estate market. Just as in residential valuation, alternative valuation services are growing in commercial real estate and being refined along with technological advances and tweaks in public policy. For instance, while commercial AVMs, or automated valuation models, are not new, the reliability of these applications has loomed as a giant question mark for many years. Also, federal regulators in recent years have placed emphasis on things such as portfolio monitoring and emphasized the importance of loan modifications and extensions, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, where USPAP compliant appraisals may be performed, but not necessarily required. Anecdotally, the size of the alternative valuation services pie that falls outside of the traditional appraisal realm is significant. Practitioners can look at this issue in a couple of ways. A purist approach, trying to compel compliance with appraisal requirements, or a pragmatic approach, working within the allowances to find ways to effectively co-opt and address the issue. We have with us two examples of the more pragmatic approach. We hope to gain insights on their work and perspectives and identify challenges and opportunities they have identified. I'd like to welcome our panelists today, Deb Clark, MAI and co-founder and CEO of eval.com in Casper, Wyoming. Who's going to be joining with her is Peter Christensen, attorney owner with Christensen Law Firm and well known in the appraisal legal space. And lastly, Burton Lee, MAI, senior managing director of Valbridge Property Advisors. So I'd like to welcome our three speakers. Today we're going to start with Deb Clark, who's going to talk about her efforts in dealing with the evaluation issue with eval.com. So Deb and Peter, thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having us here. Thanks for that introduction as well. Obviously, this is a kind of an ever-moving target within our industry these days. Our focus is on evaluations in the valuation industry. As Bill said, I'm a CEO and co-founder of eval.com. I am also the owner and chief appraiser of Mountain West Valuations, based in Casper, Wyoming. And Peter Christensen is the attorney and legal counsel for eval.com. We certainly are incredibly proud to have him advising us with his knowledge and expertise in this area. To explain a little bit about what it is that we do, who we are, we'll kind of just start with a little bit of a backstory. So I had the opportunity to buy out the previous owners of Mountain West Valuations back in 2015. And not too long before I had that opportunity was the first time that I had heard about these real estate evaluations. I heard of them as, basically really short appraisal reports that are written by non-appraisers that banks are ordering in enormous numbers. So I had heard about these, then I had the opportunity to take over the company, and so I started to think a little more about what this service was, and kind of feeling a little bit like better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I started researching what they were, why they were here, how many there were, who was writing them, all of these kinds of questions. So it was interesting when I started researching. The first thing that that really became apparent to me was that evaluations weren't they didn't come from any kind of malice toward the appraisal industry. Instead, they were kind of born out of necessity. And the reason for that is simply math. There were more and more real estate loans and fewer appraisers. So that ultimately led the banks to petition the feds for some regulatory relief so that they could seek alternatives to traditional appraisals in order to just be able to maintain their loan volume. And so in 2010, the Interagency Appraisal and Evaluation Guidelines were published that essentially accomplished this through the three loopholes. And they don't call them loopholes in this document, I call them that. But these are three situations where lenders have it at their discretion to order an evaluation instead of a traditional appraisal. The three exemptions I'm sure most everyone is aware of, but I'll just touch on them real quick. The first is for new loans that are up to $400,000 for residential properties or $500,000 for commercial properties. With banks, credit unions, just not too long ago succeeded in raising that threshold to $1 million for commercial properties. The second loophole is existing extensions of credit, where either there's no new advancement of money or there's been no obvious or material change in market conditions or aspects of the property. And the third one, the third loophole, is the business loans up to $1 million. So between these three loopholes, we started to think about the next thing that made sense was to try to get our arms around just how many of these evaluations were perhaps out there. So if you want to go to the next slide, Bill. So first of all, it's really, really hard to nail down exactly how many evaluations there are. It's with the decreased regulations and just different kind of rules governing them in general, it's just hard to get an exact figure. So instead, what we've done is tried to kind of back into it using a number of different metrics. Here's what we've been able to come up with, super, super basic. Nobody can really hold me to these, but we do know that there are about 100 million real estate loans on the books today, and that's between commercial and residential. Of those, we understand from lenders that the average loan is touched about once every 3 years. So between new transactions, refis, and all of these portfolio monitoring practices. So we know there's about 33 million valuations being completed every year just for these 100 million loans. Now, how many of those are appraisals? Well, again, we went to lenders and we just asked, how many evals would you say you guys order to appraisals? And the average is 4 to 1. So that's for out of every 5 valuations being written, 4 of them are evaluations and 1 of them is an appraisal. So this suggests that there could be as many as about 26.5 million of these valuations that could qualify for an evaluation. It could be an evaluation. These also could potentially be ABMs or validations. Banks do have alternatives on the books. But the idea, what I'm trying to get across here is just how big this part of the industry is. So knowing this and understanding that appraisers are not the ones that are writing the majority of these valuations, of course, we needed to understand why. Why is it that appraisers are left out of this? Why aren't they getting into this space? So, you want to go on to the next slide? So we started asking them. We started doing our research. Of course, I knew my own reasons why I wasn't writing them, but I wanted to find out what other people thought. And there are definitely 3 main reasons why appraisers stayed out of this space. The first one was kind of general misunderstanding and a lack of bandwidth. So appraisers didn't really understand what these evaluation reports were. It's not like there's copies of them floating around that they can just grab onto and learn from. The fact that that these evaluations we're talking about are not USPAP compliant, they were very concerned about regulations. Of course, if they're not USPAP compliant, all but I think we're up to 11 states now will not allow appraisers to write them anyway. And so between time and regulations and what they perceived as being the added risks from, from them or their office preparing these products, it was something that was just, had been kind of disregarded by appraisers. They kind of turned their backs on them. And so to the risks and regulations part, I'd like to kind of turn that over to Peter. I know he's got some great insight here.
Yeah, Deb, I remember when we first started talking about what you were doing and your desire to expand what you're doing across the country. One of the first things we talked about was, is there risk to an appraisal firm like yours from doing evaluation? What's the liability risk, that kind of risk? And I think that you were surprised by some of the answers that I gave you initially, because a lot of appraisers who don't do, well, you do evaluations, but a lot of appraisers who don't do evaluations think that, oh, there must be a lot of liability risk attached to doing an evaluation. And I think probably one of the first things I told you when we were talking was, I've seen maybe somewhere like 8,000 plus legal claims of one sort or another against appraisers in all 50 states, big firms, little firms, residential, every kind of valuation issue, legal issue that you can get into. I've pretty much seen it thousands of times. And I can only find maybe 3 instances where any provider, not necessarily an appraiser, but any provider of an evaluation has had a lawsuit filed against them for professional negligence or other kind of negligence. So it's a very, very rare thing that an appraiser or an evaluation firm would have a liability issue relating to evaluation. So that was, I think, something that surprised you when we initially talked. And I think as we get into like later in your presentation, I'll be a little bit more specific on the reasons about why there is this low instance of legal risk, but maybe a high perception of the risk there.
Right. Okay, thanks. Okay, so we found ourselves at this place where, we were starting to get this understanding that there's this enormous opportunity and appraisers aren't involved, right? They're not writing these, they're not contributing to this part of the industry. If anything, the appraisal industry had done all it could to, to put the brakes on the eval business. There were the Appraisal Foundation, so USPAP, and state boards. Essentially they blocked appraisers from preparing non-USPAP compliant evaluations for the most part, right? It didn't comply with USPAP, there was nothing you could do. But that wasn't stemming the tide of these services. So the Appraisal Foundation and it had then created these USPAP compliant evaluation templates that says, well, here appraisers, you guys can use these, still comply with USPAP, should be able to get them done pretty quick, and then you guys can compete with evals. But that also didn't really seem to be working. It didn't seem to be having the effect that they thought it would. The evals were still being ordered in increasing numbers. Like these non-USPAP, non-appraiser prepared evals were being ordered in increasing numbers. That was the truth of it. And so when that didn't also seem to be working, states have since started changing their laws so that appraisers can write these non-USPAP compliant evals for banks in these particular instances outlined in the interagency guidelines. This is the 11 states that have changed their laws so far. And I think Peter's going to speak to those a little bit later as well. But as we see it, there are 3 main problems with these attempted solutions. All right. First of all, it's actually, we have heard from lenders, we've read articles one of which cites John Brennan from the Appraisal Foundation actually interviewing principals from large major lenders across the country and asking them, wouldn't you guys rather have an appraisal? If it costs the same and you could get it in the same amount of time, wouldn't you rather have an appraisal than some evaluation prepared by a non-appraiser? And the surprising answer was actually no. We would rather have, where permissible, where we can, where the risks allow and things like that, we would rather have an evaluation. So that's something that I think tends to take the appraisal industry by surprise. Second, appraisers, even when they're allowed to write these non-use PAP evals, they still don't want to compete with non-appraisers' low fees and turn times, right? When you're used to making what you do an hour writing an appraisal, it's tough to go to half that or less, a quarter of that to write an eval and compete. They're just not interested. The economics don't make sense. So then third, even if they were, there still aren't enough appraisers to meet demand, no matter how you slice it. So here we were. This was, let's see, I took over the company in 2015. This was the beginning of 2018. So I'd done all this research, I'd learned all this stuff. And that was when I thought, okay, there has to be a better way around this, right? This is what leads us to the solution. And this is where things start to get exciting. This is where Peter comes in, and this is where we believe that we've got something that's really valuable to share with our industry. So after all of this research, I had found that here in Wyoming, as in about 30 other states, while I, as an appraiser, can't write evals, there's nothing stopping me as a business owner from hiring people who can, all right? So what I did was I added a department of non-appraiser evaluation analysts writing evaluations for our lenders. We trained them in-house. We had them take appraisal classes so that they could learn the industry. And what we did was that we brought them in, we trained them, and we gave them access to our data, access to our local market expertise, our market trends reports, all of these different things they had, cap rate analysis, everything. And so, what we started to find, where we started with one bank client that we pitched this idea to, we said, we'll charge the same as what you're getting from these other non-appraisers. We just believe that we can provide you with a better quality because the quality of the analysis and the quality of the training that our analysts have is just better, being kind of rooted in the appraisal industry. So since then, we've gone from one client to 16 just with our own business. We've also seen a corresponding growth in our appraisal revenue, actually, which contrary to what a lot of appraisers are concerned about, evaluations are being ordered anyway. So the whole fear that, well, I may cannibalize my appraisal business if we start doing evals is just not true. The banks are getting them already. They're just not getting them from you. So our lender clients were really happy with the quality of the product that we were giving them compared to what they were getting from other people. Just last week, I was speaking with a couple of different lenders who told me the exact same thing. So, so great feedback from lenders, and surprisingly, my phone started ringing by appraisers asking me how we did it. Kind of, we cracked the code, so to speak. How did you guys figure out a way into this part of the industry? And is it a model that you would be willing to share with me? So this is what led us to create eval.com, which is where we are today. We have created an innovative, really, truly an innovative business model that allows any of you as appraisers to enter the market. This model has been designed by industry experts to ensure that appraiser companies and their permits are compliant with state and federal laws and regulations. Part of this is that we work with USPAP instead of against it. So yeah, I think at that point, you know, it's, you want to switch to the next slide, Bill, I think. Okay, yeah, I guess at this point, we're going to bring Peter in and just kind of let him speak to some of the issues that I've touched on and gather his thoughts.
Yeah, Bill, in the beginning, you said something about appraisers, and I think you were talking about appraisers needing to be pragmatic about the kinds of products that they offer. And many appraisers do just want to stick to appraisals. and they want to stick to USPAP oriented products. And so they do have a lot of resistance to thinking about things like evaluations. Can an appraisal firm offer an evaluation? And so, you know, what I realized though as a lawyer, and I'm not an appraiser, that I realized a few years ago that I, as a lawyer, couldn't just see valuation in an appraiser's eyes or from a USPAP vantage point. I had to be pragmatic myself and think about all kinds of valuation technologies, services, and products. So that included evals and also AVMs, which Burton's going to be talking about. But when I work with appraisal firms that are thinking about, like Deb's firm, thinking about evaluations, one of the first questions that an appraiser asks, and we've already talked about it, is, well, what about liability? If I'm not using USPAP, if I'm not following USPAP, assuming you're not required to follow it for an eval, won't I have more liability? And as I already said, though, it is very difficult for me as a lawyer to find any more than a small handful of cases where practitioners, appraisal firms have been sued or held liable for evaluations as opposed to real appraisals under USPAP. And one of the key reasons for that is with an eval, assuming it's a non-USPAP eval, with an eval, you don't have the same standard of care. You don't have, USPAP forms a standard of care. USPAP is integral to an appraiser, a professional negligence claim against an appraiser, because it forms that duty. What does an appraisal have to consist of? Well, it has to, for most assignments, meet USPAP. You don't really have that same legal standard of care for an evaluation. You do have some standards, you have some requirements, and they're primarily set forth in the federal interagency appraisal and evaluation guidelines, but you don't have like a USPAP where you can actually be disciplined or sued for violating that standard of care. So that's one of the key differences, and part of the reason why there has been so little liability attached to evaluations.
Peter, if I could just jump in real quick on that point. Is it also because the evaluations are less likely to be shown to the borrower?
Absolutely.
Or held internally by the institution?
Absolutely. Bill, I think as you know well, a majority of legal claims against appraisers come from parties who aren't their clients or their intended users, namely borrowers most of the time. And because most evaluation products, most of the time, certainly if it's residential, it does need to be shown to a residential borrower, but most of the time an evaluation product is not exposed to the borrower, so you don't get the borrower claim that you more often do on an appraisal. And then another reason why there's this lower liability overall with evaluation products, you know, rightly or wrongly, is that there is a little bit of a lower expectation for what an evaluation is, of course. An evaluation is not an appraisal. Part of, an appraisal is seen as a higher quality tool, a higher level of analysis. It is held, an appraiser's appraisal is held to a higher standard than an evaluation. You know, an evaluation is not expected to be as accurate or to contain all of the analysis that an appraisal does. So that's another reason for the lower incidence of liability as well. And then, now this one is perhaps even a bit unfair. With many appraisals, if an appraiser tries to, in an appraisal report with a lender, a large lender, or if an appraisal report's going through an AMC, if an appraiser tries to put in very protective language into an appraisal report, such as limitations of liability, they'll get a lot of negative feedback from a lender or from an AMC when they put in something like a limitation of liability. When you are drafting, when you're creating a forms for evaluations, you have a lot more freedom to protect yourself as a practitioner. whoever is doing an eval. So you can, and every evaluation form that I've developed and that I've seen in the marketplace contains a lot of limitations of liability on the part of the analyst and the firm that's delivering that evaluation. So that's almost an unfair reason why there's less liability attached to evaluations. But it's key, and so if you were to look at any of the forms that I've created, they do have a lot of protections for the actual practitioner, the analyst who's putting together that document. So that's the liability issue. What about states? Now, there is and Deb's talked about this, there is this kind of unfairness within the state regulatory system of where there are only about 10, 12 states that permit appraisers to do evaluations outside of USPAP. And as Deb said, lenders, the reality is that lenders want evaluations. They don't want restricted appraisal reports that are labeled as evaluations. Lenders expect an evaluation. They don't expect usually to see the term appraisal report attached to it. But only 10 or 12 or so states permit appraisers to do evaluations outside of USPAP. So that puts appraisers at a disadvantage there, because the moment you call an evaluation an appraisal, it comes with all that liability, all that regular liability that comes with USPAP attached to that evaluation. And it comes with those higher expectations and that higher standard of care. So that's the fundamental unfairness there. And I know that AI is really involved with the states in trying to persuade more state appraiser regulatory boards to permit appraisers to do evals outside of USPAP. But then when you look at the states, about 30 to 35 states permit non-appraisers to do evaluations, at least within the meaning of the Federal Interagency and Appraisal, Federal Interagency Appraisal and Evaluation Guidelines. So about 30, 35 states permit non-appraisers to do a non-USPAP evaluation. So there's that bit of unfairness in the system right there. Other lawyers might make an argument that that evaluations are preempted by federal law. That's not a position that we take in the legal work that I do for eval.com. I don't subscribe to that viewpoint, but there is an argument to be made there because of the federal IAG that there is a preemption, but I don't quite go along. I don't want to.
It's partially tested at this point.
Yeah, partially tested. And federal preemption, it's a defense to a lawsuit in the work that I'm doing. So that, that's not a happy result. You don't want to have like, oh, this hypothetical defense out there. You actually want to get the work done and be free of lawsuits. So in the work that I do with eval.com and Deb, we are very much focused on, okay, in which states do the state regulators permit appraiser evals, in which states permit non-appraiser, non-USPAP evals. We're very cognizant of that, and we're very compliance focused on that, because we don't want to step into the bigger legal issues. So there are, as I said, 30, 35 states that permit non-appraisers to do evals, and Deb does have a chart that I prepared that she'll share with anyone who's listening, where I've gone through every state's definition of what an appraisal is, what appraisal services are in those states, whether any special exemptions apply, and then determine on a state-by-state basis where appraisers can do evals and where non-appraisers can do evals and where there's a crossover.
Sure.
So
I was just going to add, Peter, I think to be fair, I think it's fair to say that the clientele, there's a range of savviness of the clientele out there, and there may be some clients who are okay or comfortable with the so-called evaluation appraisal in a restricted use format, a report format, but where you might find one of those, you're likely to find a handful of others who are looking for a pure eval product.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would think the larger lenders would tend to be more sophisticated in their viewpoint about the product. But then when you look at it from the practitioner's viewpoint, practitioner, the appraiser, or the analyst, in my opinion, should want to do if the option's available to them, to do a non-USPAP evaluation because of the liability that attaches to it once you say, I'm complying with USPAP. So then
just to clarify our position there, where our chapters have wanted to pursue that, we've offered support in pursuing that allowance for appraisers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then to round out kind of the risk issues that I'm talking about, there is sometimes a concern that appraisers bring up about E&O insurance. Does my E&O policy cover me doing an evaluation as opposed to an appraisal? Well, certainly if you have an appraiser's E&O policy and you are doing a USPAP evaluation, then there's absolutely no question under any E&O policy because you're doing an appraisal. So there'd be no question there. Other E&O policies would also cover appraisers who are consulting. So there can be coverage for appraiser performed evaluations under that. But then once you get into non-appraisers performing evaluations, well then yes, you do need to be looking at a different type of E&O policy that's going to cover a non-appraiser or an appraiser doing a non-USPAP evaluation. You do need to make sure that you have the right coverage, but it's not hard to find. It's Deb's company, for example, has coverage that permits her company to do non-appraiser evaluations, and it's just a matter of having that coverage mentioned specifically in the policy. So the E&O insurance part of this is not a complicated thing. It's just a item that anyone who's going to be selling evaluations needs to be aware of, and just make sure they have the right policy.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. And yeah, so I guess at that point, I mean, I think we've kind of, gotten it fairly deeply into what evaluations are and why appraisers aren't involved. The results of this, of course, is that we've got millions of evaluations, non-USPAP evaluations being prepared by analysts outside the appraisal profession. They're not being supported by appraisers or appraisal quality data. And so the quality of these reports that's being delivered to lenders is just not what it should be. So between that and appraisers being cut out of this, this part of the industry, that's what our model promises to bring solutions to. This is what we do. This is what we've done. This is our goal. First of all, to allow appraisers to increase their revenues by leveraging their existing data and resources without a significant time or financial investment, and in a way that is compliant and low risk. So that's a big win for appraisers. Second, we now have qualified analysts that are able to get what they need to properly analyze these properties and markets and arrive at more credible opinions of value that they're then submitting to these lenders, who these lenders are then able to get higher quality valuations, which lead to safer lending practices and better protections for the public. And ultimately, that's why our industry is here. So, so we're certainly very excited about what we're doing. Essentially, we've taken what we believe we have been able to create and validate in the market itself, this model where we act as kind of the platform for evaluation analysts to work with appraisers to be able to provide higher quality valuations for this industry as a whole. So if anyone has questions about evaluations, if you'd like to see these lists that Peter put together that outline the states that allow appraisers to write them, that allow non-appraisers to write them, if you have legal questions, if you're wondering about risk or anything like that, or if you'd like to learn more about our business model, just send an email to info@eval.com and we'll get back to you. That's about it.
Thank you, Deb and Peter. Let me unpack a couple of things on that. With the experience so far with eval.com, I'm wondering if you could characterize, or if you have any feedback from your clients as to the intended use of these evaluations? Are these being used for portfolio monitoring or for transactional work with loan modifications or refinancings, or all of the above? Do you have any sense as to kind of the shape of that market?
Yeah, it's definitely all of the above. When it comes down to, to getting like exact reasons for why they're ordering the eval. They're not required to. We don't have to list any kind of intended use on these reports. So a bank just orders them, and yeah, we don't get really deep into why. And in a way, that's kind of good too. When you have, you guys were talking about, the more sophisticated banks out there versus those that may not quite be as sophisticated. We've had some of the less sophisticated lenders who may not know as much about evals call and ask us, we've got this loan, do you think we can just order an eval? And it's like, oh my gosh, you shouldn't be asking us that. Like, that's not, you guys need to go read the interagency guidelines. You need to, this is not,
Yes.
Yeah. So
a question for their regulator.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, they need to weigh all of their own risks and everything. So, it's really hard for me to really just kind of answer your question. I would say though, probably for commercial, I think we see fewer new transactions having evals, and that could be, perhaps because of the $500,000 threshold with banks, simply prohibiting a lot of the new loans. So I think we end up doing quite a few refinances, but definitely a lot of just loan monitoring practices. I think that's probably where the majority of our commercial work goes. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And as far as concern from appraisers over potential erosion of the current appraisal business, however you want to characterize that, have you run into instances where the evaluation service request has been upticked to an appraisal request?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we've and unfortunately we've had to go the other way too. Where like we'll get an order for an appraisal, and then they'll say no, put it on hold, and then and our appraisal department is separate from our evaluation department, but then we'll see it up on the board as an eval a month or two later. But that really doesn't happen very often. I mean, in the last 2.5 years, that's maybe happened 2 or 3 times, where having something that that has been an eval then turn into an appraisal for whatever reason. Yeah, we definitely see that. But I think more the increase in appraisal volume that we've seen is just the fact that that we've been getting, like, that this company has been getting in front of more lenders because we've got better marketing, we've got better workflow systems. We've just become a more efficient office since adding this other service. That's made us leaner and meaner and just able to do a better business in general. So yeah, it's been good for our appraisal business too.
Thank you for that. And lastly, how has COVID-19 affected this build out as well? And what kind of workflow changes have you seen, during the pandemic?
We have seen a marked increase in evaluation orders from our existing clients. Yeah, I would say, not double what we did at the same time last year, but close. And I mean, our appraisal volume is strong. We are staying busy. So it's yeah, it's I think lenders are just nervous, so they're ordering. They're just doing a lot of kind of monitoring for a lot of these loans, and evals are faster, they're cheaper, and so yeah, I think that they're turning to those when they're in a pinch.
Thank you very much, Deb. All right, let's kind of turn a little bit, although in a related subject. Bert Lee with Valbridge Property Advisors, and we recently saw that Valbridge had released in a commercial automated valuation model, and I'd like to hear from Valbridge about how that's going and some of the opportunities and challenges that they're facing. So, Burton, appreciate you joining us this afternoon. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Bill. Appreciate the opportunity. So one of the questions that's come up is why in the world did Valbridge develop an AVM, and what's that about? And so there's really three, I think, fairly important reasons that Valbridge is involved there. And one is that really Valbridge is focused as a valuation thought leader with a focus on technology, and the AVM certainly matches up with that. So in the desire to continually improve the professional analysis that the appraisers are performing, innovating new techniques, and improving the quality of data that Valbridge uses in their appraisals, this fits right in. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that we view the AVM as a kind of a part of the valuation continuum. So the appraisal is clearly the valuation gold standard. And there's a lot of reasons and places where it is the perfect solution. There are other times, as Deb and Peter have been discussing, where the evaluation is a good solution to a problem, a valuation problem. It can be available quicker, lower cost. There tends to be limited data analysis, and as they indicated, both appraisers and non-appraisers perform those. The AVM really represents the latest artificial intelligence technology, instantaneous values, and it's available 24/7, the way that it's put together. So if you move on, the next reason that Valbridge had an interest in developing an AVM is that the national database that Valbridge has created we're always looking for ways of utilizing that data, various analytical tools, and the AVM is really an excellent application for that set of data. So essentially the way it works is all 78 offices that Valbridge has, their data flows into the same database, and this results in what we believe is the highest quality of data that exists because it's independently verified by appraisal professionals in each local market where the transactions are occurring. And so it's a use of that data. And then if you go to the next slide, please, for an AVM, we see, so Valbridge partnered with Tuco Tech to develop the AVM, and there are really three critical elements. One is that high quality data that you're utilizing for the analysis. The second is, world-class data scientist, and then some evaluation expertise that brings that all together to determine how these analyses can be put together to result in a great conclusion. If you go to the next slide, the third reason that Valbridge wanted to be a part of develop an AVM is because of the reality that commercial AVMs are going to be an integral part of the future valuation landscape. Whether we like it, whether we don't like it, whether there's resistance, very similar to the evaluations, it serves a purpose in the marketplace and they're going to be there. And so what's happening is, traditionally appraisers were a pretty independent lot, a lot of them working ones in offices of one or two or a small group of people. And in order to keep up with the technological advances, in order to keep up with the efficiencies that are needed on an ongoing basis, more and more people are gathering together in appraisal practices, and then that's happening across markets. And so we really have the opportunity now for this aggregation of data to be applied in a whole variety of ways that really hasn't been available. And so until relatively recently, the commercial AVM opportunities just have not been as present. So Valbridge really wants to be a part of that. So if you go on to the next slide, we really talk about the commercial future of commercial AVMs, and the things that are driving that are they represent a low cost check on value with instantaneous results. And as the cost of human capital to process loans and transactions continues to increase, the ability to seek out economical, technological solutions to help with that process, it's going to continue to happen. The other category there, the third bullet, is the fourth approach to value, possibly. And we've been discussing this, we've been evaluating, we've actually are in discussions with a lender of possibly adding an AVM and as a supplement to our appraisals. Exactly how they fit, we're still determining, but it's it's reasonable to expect that this type of application for an AVM could develop over time. So turns out, if you go to the next slide, when you have a new service, you end up with new challenges as well. And so we're working through many of those. Probably the main thing that we are working on is the arena of educating the users. Who's going to be using the AVM, and what education do they need? And so the next slide starts the explanation that the results of an AVM are not an appraisal. And that's clear from both USPAP as well as the interagency guidelines. However, an appraiser is allowed to use an AVM, the results of an AVM, in creating an appraisal, as long as they believe that the AVM results are credible. And we're working to try to get some further clarification about what that means. And I'll talk a little bit more about the confidence scoring that that our AVM has to help bridge that gap. So the other arena that USPAP calls out is the ability for an appraiser to run an AVM on behalf of a client, as long as they don't express an opinion as to the reliability or the credibility of that result. So it can be a mechanical function operating the AVM, but void of the appraiser's expression of an opinion. So that's one area we're educating. If you go on the next area that we're educating, in the AVM that we've developed, the property types, and the next slide shows them, we have really focused on multifamily, industrial, office, and retail properties. And there's a variety of reasons for that. These are the main property types that exist. They're the property types that have the most data, and they are the property types that allow us to end up with a quality result more frequently than we would have if we were expanding to all property types in the commercial arena. And even within these property types, we are limiting. So for example, for retail, the sub-property type of a regional mall, we're not analyzing regional malls. And for industrial properties, sub-property type of auto dealerships, we're not analyzing auto dealerships. We're analyzing the fundamental parts of what go into the commercial real estate market. And the way that our model is set up is that the user goes in, identifies their property type and address, and then we let them know right away whether that's something that we can analyze or not, so that they don't have any more time invested in that process before they know that no, we can't do that one. Over time, will we be adding others? Most likely, but right now we're really focused on getting results that are as reliable for the user as we possibly can. Similarly, geographically, we don't analyze properties everywhere. The majority of the markets that we're serving are those markets where Valbridge has an office. And so those are 78 major markets across the country. And there are some instances where an office might serve more than one market. And so even though we don't have an office there, we still have sufficient data in order to serve that market. So we're providing input on that at the very outset of the way an analysis comes together. Then the third area that we're educating users about relates to the confidence score. And the confidence score is terminology that from an appraisal perspective, we're not as comfortable with as they are in the artificial intelligence machine learning world. It is a fundamental part of determining whether the model that has been developed is functioning the way that is intended to. And so really the confidence score represents the statistical reliability of the value estimate. And that's what it represents. So if you go on to the next slide, please, you'll see that the confidence score includes the analysis of several factors, the standard deviation between the predicted value and the real valuation for that property type and that sub-property type in that particular market. That's one of the factors. Another factor is the importance of the property features themselves. An example of that might be that if you've got an apartment building and the average unit size is 500 square feet, and you're in a market where the average unit size is 800 square feet, then the data may not match up as well as you would like, and so the confidence score is going to be lower compared to if you're analyzing a property, an apartment property where the average unit size is 800 square feet and the market is 800 square feet, then your confidence score is going to go up. So that's one of the factors. And then just the number of transactions that are available in that market for that sub-property type also plays a role in the level of confidence that the model can produce. So all those factors come into play when developing the confidence score. And so we display, and then the confidence score, we use that confidence score to not only produce does the model produce the value, and in combination with the confidence score, we produce a range of values for that particular property. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see how we, some of the information as to how we do that. So we take the confidence score and we put it into categories A, B, and C. So if you're over 88% confident that the model has got the right conclusion, then we create a confidence score that's, a range of value that's smaller. If it's 75 to 88%, we have a little bit larger relevant range of value. And it's 65% to 75% confidence score, then we have an even wider relevant range of value. And so it makes sense. The more confident that you are in the results, the smaller the range that the value should be, and then the less confident you are, the wider the range. If our confidence score is below 65%, then we don't provide any value at all. And the way our modeling is set up, or the way our business model is set up, is that once the analysis is run, we provide the user with the results of our confidence score, and then they can determine whether that confidence score is adequate for the valuation problem they're trying to solve or not. And if it is, that's when they pay, and they get the actual valuation results and the range of value and the valuation report. If they don't think it meets the valuation problem that they're trying to solve, then they can take a pass, and there's no charge for getting to that point. So there are many times when a lower confidence score might be still very acceptable if you have someone with a $10 million building and they need a $600,000 tenant finish build out and they're just looking for a line of credit, a lower confidence score is probably going to be very adequate for that type of situation. And what we've done is we've set it up to where the user can make that determination as to whether it's a good fit for them or not. So if you go to the next slide, I've got a little information about the reaction that we've had in the marketplace to this point. So the product's called ValNow, and we've really been focusing on communicating with lender clients. That's where most of our clients are at this point anyway. And we really find that there's 3 areas of particular interest. One is the validation of existing collateral values. How does the value today compared with the value at the time that they made the loan? And typically they're focusing on 3 years prior. And so that's one way that they are interested. There's also the loans as discussed for the evaluations, where it's below the de minimis value, and they can get just an instantaneous answer to determine whether they want to proceed or not. And clearly the expectation is that it will fit for some situations, but not for all. That's up to them to decide. Then the third category that we really didn't think about, to be honest, until we started talking to people, and we're working on developing ways where we can do a point in time portfolio analysis. And what that is kind of starting to take shape to look like is, do we have the ability to take our entire portfolio, commercial loan portfolio, take a look at where we are, and compare that maybe to where we have been, when we originated those loans. But also part of the discussion is that, and maybe we'll take that portfolio snapshot view again in the future, so that we have a benchmark frame of reference that's different than the appraisal. So it's a different way of monitoring their portfolio exposure. And is it increasing the risk, decreasing the risk, or is it staying about the same? Other users that we're envisioning are investors, brokers, attorneys, accountants, appraisers. But for right now, because we are very fresh into this, we are focusing on the lenders and trying to get that clear. We're developing techniques for their internal model validation requirements, and that's where our focus is at the moment. Then if you look at the last slide, you'll see that Valbridge's reaction to ValNow has been that we see this as really an opportunity to attract new clients by adding to that continuum of services that are available. And we're already experiencing that in just the few short weeks that we've been available. We also see, like with all of our focuses on thought leadership and innovation, is the opportunity to attract new appraisers to the Valbridge efforts, because those who want to align with where things are going can see the opportunity for them to participate in that growth. And then if you see our last slide, we really see there's a bright future ahead for ValNow, and we're looking forward to being able to serve the commercial real estate industry in that way.
Thank you, Bert. Let me unpack a couple of issues there. It sounded at the outset when you were talking about the various Valbridge offices contributing to the larger corporate database that you may have envisioned leveraging the database, the Valbridge database, as an asset. Was that contemplated going in, that you might have had this intangible there as the database itself, and utilizing and trying to leverage that?
I think there's no question about that, and you can only envision the challenges associated with integrating a variety of appraisal firms and all their data into a centralized database, and we're continuing to refine that. And we're finding that there's great receptivity because it's actually making it more efficient for the appraisers in the field as well.
Thank you for that. The confidence scoring process, the bank regulation or the interagency appraisal and evaluation guidelines have some commentary around AVMs, and in the where they've existed in the residential space, there's been a heavy emphasis on testing obligations by the institutions around the AVMs that they're utilizing. There's some expectation that they're conducting a level of testing and have some understanding about the AVMs. Is that something that you all are doing as well, going through an AVM testing process, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we have an ongoing process of evaluating. So we're working. So the residential market is developing the AVM in a slightly different manner than we are. They're utilizing more typically a technique known as nearest neighbors analysis, and they actually come up with comparable sales from the area that they're then analyzing to come up with the value. We're not doing that technique. We've looked at it. We feel like we can come up with better results, higher confidence scores by taking all of the national data, looking at it, having all the relationships in place, with the confidence score again being built based upon, well, fine, how much data we have in that local market, how closely does that data match up with the other properties that are in that market, and how does that relate to the statistical deviation in our training models with our hundreds of thousands of transactions that we're using. And so we have the ability to, we have a significant amount of statistical data that is developed by the tools that are used to create the AVM that we can go through and back test, and that's what we're doing. And then we can share that information, our methodology and our techniques, with any of the lenders who are so inclined to actually build this into their regular processing.
Sure. So there are some other commercial AVMs in the marketplace. I mean, they've been around. There's been some refinement, some new offerings as well. How are you differentiating the Val now from some of the maybe non-appraisal firm affiliated AVM services?
Mm-hmm. So there's probably a couple of primary differences. The first one being just the quality of data that we have that's going into the analysis itself. The quality and quantity of the data that we have is not going to be something that others are going to be able to replicate just because of how it comes together. The second thing that we have is our process involves the user entering data associated with the property that they're having analyzed. That's a combination of some physical data and some financial data that is current and up to date, as compared to the situation where the model is utilizing the data that they developed from other sources about that property. And so the combination of this data that we have to start with, the quantity and quality of that data, and the ability to have that input that's being brought in by for each specific analysis allows us to be performing a result that is very good.
Sure. The bank regulators have had a project under the table for about 10 years now, coming from the Dodd-Frank Act, specifically relating to AVM, the development of AVM quality control standards. And it's ebbed and flowed over the years. There was an initial attempt to build the quality control standards out several years ago, and it was seen as a very complicated assignment, and it kind of fell flat. But we've understood that there's ongoing discussions about that still within the regulators. And we know that the process is to have a level of consultation with the Appraisal Standards Board of the Appraisal Foundation. So given your new entry into the space, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges, maybe some of the learning that you've undertaken, what would you like to see the bank regulators and the ASB do in this space? Is this something that they should just leave alone for the time being and let evolve further, or should they provide a level of, are we at a point where this should be developed?
I'm personally fairly concerned about the notion that some entities such as the Appraisal Subcommittee or the Appraisal Standards Board or anyone attempts to identify standards under which an AVM should be created. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I think, on the other hand, it is reasonable to provide guidelines for appraisers and for lenders to know what's behind and how the AVMs are developed, so that they can evaluate them for their own purposes to determine whether they're a good fit. But the breadth of possibilities associated with how an AVM can be developed are so broad, and may, to come up with some written standards that are universally applied to a situation where you're valuing all property types versus some property types like we're focusing on versus just one particular market. There's so many different elements. There's so many different models that are used, and we have used 7 or 8 different models in coming up. These are artificial intelligence models, coming up with the conclusions that we've reached, that it's just not reasonable, in my opinion, that they're going to be able to help the industry by defining standards. There's an Appraisal Journal article that was written, published in the winter last year, speaking to the confidence scores and having some standardization associated with how they are developed from one AVM to another. I think that makes good sense. We've actually adopted the confidence score methodology that they recommended in that article, so that there's some comparability from one AVM to another on how the confidence scores come together. So I don't know if that helps, but I hope they bring in people who are involved with what's going on rather than not having that voice.
Yeah, I'm really worried about the technological innovation. We're really at an inflection point around real estate technology right now. It's growing by leaps and bounds, and it's going to continue at an exponential rate. So what gets developed today may not be applicable for tomorrow.
Well, I think that's right. And the other aspect is we're looking at a number of other applications for this data that in addition to the AVM. And so let's just be realistic that to the extent that we can take and deploy this data in a variety of ways that help our appraisers, help our clients, we're going to be doing it. And we really don't think I don't think it's a great idea to, I think we need to be very careful about what we do as far as imposing restrictions.
I was just going to say that. So I'm going to bring back Deb and Peter for some concluding thoughts here. It's a really interesting set of models here and experiences. Learned a lot myself, and curious, what kind of concluding thoughts, recommendations all of you would have within this space. That described it as the continuum. I think that's a very good way of describing it within the appraisal and valuation space. Deb, let me start with you. Final thoughts.
I think that it's good to just spend time with people who are solutions oriented. Clearly the appraisal industry is long past been at this point where traditional appraisals just aren't enough. So I think that the only way for us to really stay relevant in this industry, for us to secure our place in it for many years to come, is to think like this, to think beyond what we've always done, and to start exploring these other opportunities. Sometimes it can be a bit scary. I know appraisers, being one, we're a pretty risk-averse bunch. We don't like to step out into new things that may not be entirely tested yet. But we certainly feel like wherever there are people willing to to step out of kind of the more traditional paths and start to explore these these different opportunities, these different tools that are available to us, find ways for appraisers to get involved, to take advantage of these tools, to grow them and expand them and be able to add them to their tool belts, then the better for our industry as a whole. So, I definitely appreciate what Valbridge is doing and why. And I know from the appraisers that I've talked to, and we've talked to a lot, they feel this way too. They want to stay relevant. They're just not exactly sure how. So I think if we give them the tools, we give them the guidance, we give them the opportunities, then I think we're going to start to see more and more of them, stepping into these other services and these other products. So.
Thank you, Deb. Bert, let me go to you.
So from my perspective, the appraiser is one of the highest educated real estate professionals that we have out there. And to be able to take that experience, the expertise, the educational background that they have, and to be able to deploy it in as many arenas as we can, that we're only going to benefit from that, both as the clientele who is going to be receiving the benefits of that, but also from a business perspective, the appraisers who have taken the time and developed their skills to broaden the ways that they can deploy those skills, I think is really a fine opportunity. And we are at an inflection point where that's going to be a great opportunity, and those who take advantage of it are going to benefit.
Peter, you have an interesting perspective and viewpoint. Can you take us home here?
I would echo both what Burton and Deb said, and that's why we the two kind of companies were paired together today, because it's about appraisers, licensed, certified appraisers, taking control of valuation, not just USPAP appraisals, but all forms of valuation. So it's really about appraisers taking control about the services and the products they offer, and thereby getting a bigger share of the market that's out there. And I know it's happening because as an outsider, about a third of my legal work, and I only work on valuation issues, about a third of my legal work in the last year and a half has been related to alternative valuation products. So I know it's a key for appraisers to stay attuned to.
Thank you all for joining us today, and let us know how we can help along the way and how the Institute can step up. And for now, this is going to close our AI Answers weekly updates from the world's leading valuation authority and our discussion on alternative commercial valuations. Thank you for joining us.
Right.
Thank you,
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.